Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Resilient Riches. Today, if you're feeling internal anxiety and are somebody that wants to overcome this anxiety on a daily basis, we have Ryan Weiss, who's an anxiety coach who's been helping people for years and years and years get through challenges, overcome obstacles, which is the definition of what building resilient riches is all about. You're going to hear today Ryan's story about what he's doing with the Nova Festival and what he's doing in LA, how he's been helping thousands of people across the world overcome their challenges and be a better version of themselves. And most importantly, you're going to be hearing about his amazing advocacy for the Jewish people. Thank you, Ryan, so much for coming on. We're so excited for this conversation. I know you just came back from Burning Man, so you're in a different planet right now, and I'm very jealous of it. But Ryan, can you give us a little bit of your background?
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here, and thank you to Steve for introducing us. And gosh, okay, my background. There's so many things I could say. Firstly, I'm not an anxiety coach, although I do support people with anxiety. I call myself an emotional intelligence and communication coach. We can get into that later. And the main obstacle that we're overcoming with people is the anxiety, the stress, and the overwhelm. So my background, I'm a Jew from Los Angeles, California. I'm a triplet. My parents had a 15-year-old and a 12-year-old, and they wanted one more, and they got 3. So I have a core wound about not being wanted. And whenever I have challenges in my life, that's the first belief that comes up. Oh, I'm not wanted. I'm not a priority. But we could talk about that later as well.
Let me just tell you that I had 4 kids in 5 years, and then 8 years later, I had twins.
I've never heard somebody else have a story similar to mine. That is awesome.
They were not wanted either, but he never told them.
My parents made sure to tell us.
We actually wanted one.
That's exactly right. So that was the dialogue we always got, was we wanted 1 and we got 3. So subconsciously you develop a belief, well, 2 of us aren't wanted. Which ones are they? Anyways, I digress. So I'm from Los Angeles. I'm in my siblings, I'm the only one not in the Jewish clergy. One of 5. My siblings are all rabbis and cantors and Jewish educators. My uncle was a rabbi. I grew up at Jewish sleepaway camp, very reform, very culturally Jewish, loved the music, loved the community, never felt connected to a sense of spirituality, which is a whole other conversation, but I just didn't know about the depths of what was available spiritually in Judaism. And I ended up becoming a dancer at 16 years old. And by 19 years old, I booked a Broadway show called Wicked, where I was a singer and a dancer, and moved to Chicago for a year and then New York for 3 years, where I performed on Broadway. And then I made my way into, I guess I'm telling you my professional background now. I made my way into back home to LA, where I got a job on the business side of entertainment. But because I had been a dancer for so long, there I am now sitting at the biggest agency in the world. If you've ever seen the TV show Entourage, this is the agency that it's based on. Literally having Lloyd's job, if you remember Lloyd, Ari Emanuel's assistant, or Ari Gold on the TV show.
I just watched some of the episodes again.
Isn't it great?
It's great.
One of my best friends played Sloane. Her name is Emmanuel Shriki. She's an incredible advocate for Israel and for the Jewish people. And
she was Don't Mess with the Zohan also.
That's exactly right. That's Emmanuel.
But she played a Palestinian.
Correct, with Adam Sandler. So what was I telling you?
My dad keeps interrupting you, so just
I love an interrupting dad.
You're Lloyd from Entourage.
He's welcome.
Entourage? No, he can't. He can't help himself.
So I'm working at this agency, but I'm a dancer, and so I'm sitting at a desk on the phone, on email all day long, and I'm like, what am I going to do to move my body? And I find yoga. And through yoga, I find yoga philosophy. And through yoga philosophy and being in these classes, I start reading Eckhart Tolle and Marianne Williamson, and I'm listening to Oprah Winfrey, and I'm studying the Vedas and Hinduism and Buddhism, and I'm finding this sense of myself that I never knew existed, and my relationships start changing, and my work starts changing, and my purpose starts changing, and I start putting up boundaries with certain people that I was like, these aren't the relationships for me. I felt like I was healing the relationships with my family members. And I got to a point where I was like, how did I, a privileged kid who grew up in Los Angeles, in the Valley and in Beverly Hills, how was I not educated about this stuff? I had an incredible education, but no one ever taught me about how to have compassion for others, how to love myself, how to heal my wounds, how to embrace my darkness, how to communicate effectively with others, how to build a relationship with Hashem, how to build a relationship with the divine. Like, no one ever taught me this stuff. And so I started thinking, I have to do this. I have to offer this to people, because if I never had it, I don't imagine a lot of people did. And so I started studying a text called A Course in Miracles, which you may not be familiar with. It's actually quite obscure that I did because it's said to be written through Christ. So for me, as a Jewish person, it was kind of weird that I was studying this text, but it was totally metaphysical, non-dogmatic. And what it suggested was, if you feel that you don't have a relationship with the divine, with your creator, with something beyond your understanding, with the intelligence of life, it's not because you don't have a relationship with it, but it's because you haven't facilitated, you haven't opened, you aren't in a practice of receiving and tuning yourself to become aware of all the magic and the miraculous nature of being alive. And
Yeah, and
so,
it's the same thing. It's the same thing that you can have with connectivity in general. We talk about people with finances, that you have to connect who you are as a person to the where you were, how you think about money, how you feel about money, what are your actual values, to where you actually want to get to. And when if you really want to be successful, the more you can align that, it's called an alignment model. The more you can align that along the chain, the more successful you will be, the more money you will make, and the less stress money will actually bring on you. So what you're saying is really profound, and it works to so many different pieces of connectivity.
I'm so with you. You want to keep talking about that? I can just keep listening. That's it. That's it right there.
So you've been coaching people for a long time, and I don't mean to cut
15
off
years.
your 15 years. So that's a long time. How did you find the difference between what people would first say is, let me just go to a therapist, versus working with someone like you, or not you
Yeah.
personally, but just the concept of
Well, I'll tell
coaching?
you,
What is the difference?
I was never concerned about that because there was no idea in my mind that I was going to become a therapist. I mean, I dropped out of college. I didn't even have an undergrad degree when I booked Wicked. So there's no thought I'm going to go back to school and become a therapist. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just asking, show me, show me, show me, show me, show me. And someone who from my world in the well, so Jamie Lynn Sigler, she talks about this publicly, another wonderful woman who was also on Entourage and The Sopranos, and she forced me to start coaching her. And I had not decided that I was going to become a coach. And that's a whole other story for a whole other time about how the divinity of life made it very, 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 very clear, despite my resistance to coaching, because I thought this is 16, 15 years ago. The only one out there really that had a big profile was Tony Robbins. I was like, that's not me. That's not what I'm trying to do. I know some other coaches. I don't really feel like they're in integrity. So I was like, no, this is not the path for me. She made it very, very clear that this was the work we were supposed to do. And her life turned around in very significant ways within 3 months of working together. Significant, major transformations. Her light turned back on and her friends started hiring me. So I never really thought about what is this career that I'm doing. It's something that really showed up for me when I was ready for it. And it's evolved over the last 15 years. So from 15 years of experience, what I share is the difference between therapy and coaching is, firstly, neither one is better, but I'd rather people start with therapy. I'd rather people get into a relationship specifically with a trauma-informed therapist, and we can talk about why that is. I think the blend of spirituality and psychology is called trauma-informed therapy. And that's a conversation we can have. But I would rather see somebody get in with a trauma-informed therapist and do the work to unpack, to become aware of what is deeply affecting, like you were saying before. What are the belief systems? What are the emotions that have gone unprocessed that are affecting the choices that you're making every day, the choices that you're afraid to make every day, the way you interact in your relationships? That subconscious history that we wake up with every single morning, that's what's in charge of our life until we find freedom from it. And the only way to find freedom from it is to bring it closer and embrace it. That's why I call it embracing your darkness. Embracing your
Yeah,
darkness.
I was having a conversation actually with a younger brother of mine, and he got very upset about something that not necessarily is a big deal, but for him it's a big deal. And I said to him, I said, you've been working with therapists for such a long time. Yes, that's great, but you need to start leveling up your mindset. You need to get to the next stage that you can think about the future and you can overcome these things, even though they are so challenging for you today. You have to go step two. Now you've worked so hard in unpacking your past and opening things up and getting to the next level. And that's really what you're talking about. That therapy gets you to a point. And that's a lot of therapists actually understand that too. And they say a lot is that The goal of therapy is that you don't need therapy
Right.
anymore.
And I think
A
the
good
goal of
therapist
coaching
will
is
say
the
that.
same.
The goal of coaching is the same. So I think it's a level two to get there. But when do people know that they can transition from level one to level two, traditional therapy, to that actual transition?
I
When do
think
they
the
know they're
idea
ready?
is so that's a great question. I don't know I have an answer for that, but let's see what comes up. I don't know that I can create a like this is the time when but here's the difference for me between therapy and coaching. For me, because by the way, saying coaching is like saying sports. You have soccer, basketball, like sports are completely different from each other and they're under the umbrella of sports. Coaching, you have executive coaching, communication coaching, trauma informed coaching, somatic coaching. Like there's so many different forms of specializations, relationship coaching, body, like nutrition coaching. There's so many forms that coaching takes. And then there's so many methodologies that coaches teach, use, etc. For me, what I'm trying to do as a coach with people is to help them hold the kind of space for themselves that a therapist holds for them. So a therapist creates this really safe space in a room where you build a relationship with them where they listen really well, they validate your experience, they help you give words to things that you maybe didn't have words for. They help you discover what's underneath the surface of your reactivity to your girlfriend or your boyfriend or your boss, or they help you identify what these core wounds are so that you can actually get to the core of your darkness, the core of your pain, address it rather than playing whack-a-mole, right? So that's what really, really good therapists do. What I'm interested in is pulling back the curtain on those processes so that you can do it for yourself. Because the problem or the limitation to me of therapy is if you have a therapy session every Monday, but it's Thursday and you're going through something difficult and your therapist isn't on speed dial, what do? You need to learn how to hold space for yourself, how to embrace what's arising in that moment, how to process it through your body. So the difference between coaching and therapy is a therapist does that for you. They create a model. They're representing that kind of a relationship for you. The opportunity with coaching is that I teach you how to do that for yourself. So coaching is more about teaching to me.
So are you saying then that like a therapist will not teach their patient like or their whatever to develop their own techniques of how to deal with their issues?
A really
So that's
good
what you're saying?
therapist will. A really good therapist will teach them techniques. I find those therapists are quite few and far between because it is still an old kind of an allopathic approach to therapy. But therapists now are kind of breaking down the rules and kind of, doing more coaching work. There's a lot of therapists out there now who have their coaching practice and their therapy practice, and they switch hats in between.
It's very interesting because it's you would think it's the same thing that happens with a lot of misconceptions is that I go to X and I will be good. Like I go to my therapist, I'm working on therapy, everybody needs a therapist, and that same conversation, that same stigma that people are having, it's really I do find it not enough, and it's even more. I find it even more profound than what you're saying is that people not only need to it can happen on a Thursday, but they need to be in their safe space all the time to be most efficient. And it's not just people who have gone through trauma. It's not just people who have darkness, and everybody has darkness internally, but it's not just those people. It's really everybody
Well, and what
needs.
I would say to that is every single human being on the face of the planet has experienced trauma, and every
Correct.
single human being on the face of the planet has darkness because darkness is a part of being human. Internally
Well,
inside our body and externally inside the world, outside in the world.
yeah, it's very deep what you're saying, and I really hope our listeners are listening to it. How are you addressing financial anxiety?
The same way I focus on any anxiety, which is there's some kind of a stimulus that happens in your life. So if it's financial, like come up with something, share with me a situation where somebody's experiencing that causes somebody financial anxiety.
Dad, you have a great example. So, a couple credit cards that happened in your life.
Yeah, I mean, we went through Sarah, in the yeshiva world, 6 kids, mortgage, tuition payments, building funds, 4 different building funds, 3 different yeshiva tuitions, mortgage, make a living, 6 kids, eating all the time.
Yeah.
He was eating all the time. The kids were like fine.
Yeah.
And this is in New York, New Jersey?
New Jersey.
Jersey.
In Teaneck, New Jersey. My oldest son is like a wrestler. They're all wrestlers. My oldest son, when he moved out, my grocery bill was in half. So
it's the real deal.
There was a lot of anxiety. I still feel that anxiety today.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
I'm not over it.
6 children. You worked maybe full time. Did your wife work as well?
My wife also worked full time in the city. We had to have a babysitter, so that was also stressful. You get a call, oh, this one's sick, that one needs this, needs that. What are you going to do? You have to run back. When am I going to run back from the city? I was working in New Jersey for a while, and then that made it a little bit easier, more accessible. But it's yeah.
That's real. That financial stress is real, especially when you have 6 or 7 people who you feel a sense of responsibility for.
Yeah, and we had 9 with the full-time live-in babysitter. We had 9 people in the house at one point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So if you can pinpoint
and
a moment, if I may.
A light. Nobody would turn off a light.
Right.
Well, now they're smart lights. That's what they did for you.
Nobody would turn off a freaking light.
You didn't have a clap on, clap off?
No. It's too high tech for us.
So if I may ask you, David, if you are willing to kind of go there with me, if you could recall a moment of great financial anxiety, 6 kids, trying to take care of everything, trying to make ends meet, needing babysitters, if you could pinpoint a moment of great financial anxiety and you could travel to that moment right now, what were you feeling inside your body in that moment?
Well, it's first of all, the way that I grew up and my parents grew up, my father was a CPA. My mother couldn't write a checkbook. She couldn't write a check on her own. She didn't know how. So my mother didn't know anything about the finances. So my father was a CPA, but he looked after everything. So in a lot of respect, that was the model. And my wife is from Europe, grew up in Europe, where it's also more traditional. So it's it's not something that you could share, which is something that we talk a lot about now, and share your finances, money talks, share all of that with your partner, but when you're going through it by yourself, that is the worst. And, because sometimes the other person panics right away. Oh, I can't talk about this. I can't deal with this. I have too much on my plate, blah, blah, blah. So you're alone. So you're by yourself. You have nobody to go to.
So my next question for you was going to be, in those moments, what are you believing about yourself? In the moment of the anxiety, what are you believing about yourself? And you just shared what you're believing about yourself, which is, I'm alone.
I'm alone and failing.
Okay, I'm alone and failing. Now, before you had kids, did you ever experience that belief, that thought, and that feeling? I'm alone.
No, I was very confident.
I'm failing.
Well, first of all, my first son was born, I went through a little bit of different because I became religious. I went to business school in Toronto, became religious when I was in school. Then I went to yeshiva for 3 years and got married there. So I had never worked. I had never.
So you're telling me that in your childhood, 100% of the time you felt connected to your primary caretakers, to your community. 100% of the time you never felt alone. You never felt othered. You never felt confused about life. You always,
I always felt that. I always felt that.
Felt what?
All those things,
You did feel alone. You did feel.
Of course, all the time. I looked at myself as introverted, so I didn't have a lot of friends. It was difficult. Only actually later in high school did I make like a nice group of friends, and then I felt more as part of it. But I always felt isolated. But one thing about myself.
Let me ask you a question. I just want to keep us in, because I have a system that I take people through, that I'm taking you through right now without you maybe knowing, but maybe you do know. Is when do you think you learned? When do you think that thought, I am alone, first occurred to you? And I want you to rewind as far back as you possibly can. And it might feel like you're making something up, or it might feel like you're telling a story that you've heard, not that you remember. When do you think?
I remember.
Okay, share it, please.
So I would say like when I became like 12, 13, 14, 15, those years were important years, because my mother was very authoritarian, and when I was like 12, starting to study for bar mitzvah, I would start to rebel and start to push back on that. And and she used to actually, I don't know if you know this yet, but she would slap me. And then I'm like 12 years old and I'm big now. I'm getting big. I slapped her back and she fell. So then she never slapped me again after that, of course.
When
But
she slapped you, was there a message she was saying to you with the slap? What was the
yeah,
message she was
control.
telling you?
It was all about control.
What was the
It was
word
all
she
about
was saying? David,
you have to listen to me. It's my way or the highway.
Mm.
It was always about what she wanted. It was always her rules, the way she wanted. And we went to therapy ourselves as a family when around that time, which was in those years, it was unusual.
Of course.
Yeah. So we went as a family. I thought my mother thought, I think, when we went, that she would be validated in everything she was trying to do. And yet then we got to the psychiatrist just started blasting her. And I think she was
I
a
will
little bit
never
taken
forget.
aback.
My mom will not want me to. And you know what? I'm going to respect my mom, and I'm not going to tell this story right now because I've done that on podcasts before. Huh?
You
I
should
just
tell.
told you my story.
Yeah,
I'll
you
just
should
say,
tell the story.
I'll just tell you, there was a moment where we all went to family counseling, and it was like one session. I don't think we ever went back again because the way the conversation started, all of us. So it was the triplets. I don't think my older siblings were there. I think it was the three of us, my mom and my dad. And maybe I was 11 or 12 years old. And we were in this therapist's office, and it became a bit of what we call like a bitch fest about my mom.
Yeah.
And my mom, so clearly everyone had challenges with her. And that's exactly was her reaction. Oh, well, clearly I'm the problem, and I'm the worst, and da 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 da, and you all are ungrateful. And we've since healed so much. My mom is a survivor of major trauma. My dad is a survivor of major trauma. These are things that they never went through any healing around.
No, it didn't exist in those days.
Yeah. So going back, so what I'm hearing is, as a child and mom and control and hitting and messages you're getting from her, I hear that the aloneness didn't start for you, and what you're telling me isn't until 12, 13, 14. But I'd imagine that it started way earlier than that, because I'm hearing the energy.
No, it's not what I meant. I meant it did start. I used to be alone a lot. We used to have a TV in the basement, so I would go down there and watch TV. I'd be by myself.
Well, let me ask you this. When your mom is physically hitting you, do you feel connected and at one with her, or do you feel alone and separate?
Obviously alone and separate.
There you go. So this has been this experience, this belief of I am alone, has been something in your life, in my life, I imagine in Yair's life, in all of our lives, that has been a part of us for a very, very long time. And because of that experience, we develop stories about ourselves, because when we're young, because of attachment, which is another conversation, we don't have the ability to tell the story, mom's going through some hard stuff. We don't have that intelligence yet. And so I'm talking even pre-verbal, when we're experiencing the stress or the pain in the household, all we can do is tell the story, there must be something wrong with me. And that is not guilt. Guilt is I did something wrong. Shame is I am wrong. And we develop this belief from very, very early. I'm all alone. I have to figure this out by myself. It's me against the world. I got to take the bull by the horns. Good luck taking a bull by the horns, right? And so the reason I'm asking you to unpack this is you find yourself years later with 6 children experiencing a different form, but it's the same anxiety. It's the same anxiety. And what I would suggest is that life is always bringing us opportunities to unpack and revisit the unprocessed pains and traumas and unprocessed emotions and beliefs about ourselves that we didn't have the support to unpack back then. Because if you had a nurturing parent who was able to attune to your needs when you were upset because of what was going on, that parent would have noticed it and would have put their full attention on you, not changed you, validated your experience, asked you questions about it, so you felt a sense of safety to experience your emotions and communicate them. And your primary caretaker, which is the person responsible for keeping you safe, stayed in connection with you. We didn't have that as human beings. Most of us didn't have that.
No, that's a much different reality. I don't know what reality that exists.
Correct. You're right. You're absolutely right.
Wasn't anything that we had.
It's a reality that is potential for our human race. And I think that these newer generations are taking us there. Because of all of this, not only would we learn to stop expressing our uncomfortable emotions, because it threatened the safety we derive from attachment with primary caretakers, but we also learned to dissociate to dissociate from them, to stop feeling them so that we didn't have to express them. And we
That's
push them
absolutely
down.
true.
And we
Yeah, you
typically
had
push
to. Yeah,
them.
no, yeah, that was it. That was what you had to do to survive.
That's exactly right. And we will always choose the survival over the authenticity. Authenticity is, what are my thoughts, my feelings, my needs, and my desires? And I feel them and I express them and I communicate them in my relationships. And therefore, I build a life that's aligned with who I am and what I want and what I don't want. But because we always choose safety, attachment over authenticity, we have a lifetime, and I'll wrap this up. I know I've been talking for a little while, but we have a lifetime of suppressing emotions. Those emotions don't go anywhere. Now you're an adult, you have 6 kids, you're stressed financially, you're overwhelmed, you're probably not sleeping well. And all of that unprocessed emotion in your body from when you were born through all the way to the present moment, it's all right here. It's all in your body. And then there's a stressful thing that comes, a trigger comes, a credit card bill. How are we going to afford our kids' private education? Whatever it is, the food is difficult to come by, whatever it is. The trigger happens and an explosion of emotion happens inside your body. But because you learn to dissociate from your emotions, you push it away by jumping up into your head and you say, what's the problem and how am I going to solve it? What's the problem and how am I going to solve it? And you go into solving mode, completely dissociated from an explosion of emotion that's happening in your body. So that's like a volcano erupting and us putting a lid on it. That's going to create tension, right? Opposing forces, volcano exploding, putting a lid on that volcano is going to create tension. That tension is experienced as anxiety. So my belief is that anxiety isn't necessarily a unique emotion. My belief is that anxiety is your body's way of trying to tell you that you have an emotion like fear, sadness, anger, resentment, jealousy. Anxiety is trying to tell you that there's an emotion that you're not letting yourself feel. I'll pause there.
It's interesting because my father was known not to respond to much, but when things would, like every once in a while when things would build up, he would go nuts. Mm-hmm. He would start screaming, his eyes would bulge, and that would be like then you would be scared of him, and that would be like every whatever.
And that's most people. Most people, the emotions build and build and build and build without awareness of them. Because we're running, we're social mediaing, we're working, we're familying, we're busy, we're drinking, we're smoking, we're whatever we're doing to distract ourselves. It builds and builds and builds until it explodes. And then it explodes in violence. It explodes in being unkind to each other.
So how do you create that? It's kind of like the old way of treating acne in the simple way is that you use these creams and then pushes the pimple down. The only real way to actually get rid of it, get clear skin like Yair Klyman's,
beautiful,
is to exfoliate and to open up the pores. And at the beginning, it's very, very challenging. You look terrible. And then, but over time, and actually your skin is clear. And even if you do develop something new, you're actually able to get through it much quicker. So we've talked about a lot of
I have to jump into that because you're describing how I look at relationships. Our relationships with each other, we are exfoliating each other. But as you said, when you're exfoliating, you can get blemishes. You know, it can be uncomfortable at first as you're exfoliating, right? But I think that's what we're doing as human beings. As we're moving toward healing, we all have all this dead skin that's built up on our bodies. And then we try to get in relationship with each other, whether that's a colleague, a co-founder, you know, a parent. Notice how I'm doing this with my fists, right? We get into relationship with a lover, a sibling. And I believe the purpose of relationships is that we rub on each other. My friction creates friction for you, and we build heat together and we argue and but my stuff, my past wounds, my beliefs about myself triggers your stuff, your beliefs about yourself, your past wounds. And now we're ego on ego and we're exfoliating. But the beautiful thing is that in old school diamond mining, Marianne Williamson always talks about this, or used to, in old school diamond mining, before we had laser cutting, the only way to find the diamond was to take a rock and another rock and rub them together to create heat and friction. And the rock would fall off and unveil the diamond inside. And that's what our relationships are for us.
So pivoting to that question. So the two questions I have on that is, yes, we know we are identifying a problem. Forget about, let's say, not using you just in general. What would be a basic solution that somebody can walk away with at the end of this podcast, I can actually help them.
Beautiful. When you are in a moment of stress, overwhelm, anxiety, when you're feeling dysregulated at all, pause and ask yourself one question. What am I feeling right now in my body? I'm feeling anger. I'm feeling resentment. My heart is racing. My leg is pulsing. My palms are sweating. Ask yourself that one question and put your attention on what am I feeling? Because that way, as I said, a lot of the work that I do is around embracing your darkness. When the sadness, when the anxiety, when the guilt, when the shame, when the anger comes, we typically do everything we can to avoid it. And then we give it all of its power. And so instead, what happens, think about an embrace. The first thing you have to do when you embrace someone is open your arms, you open your heart, you open your system. So when the uncomfortable emotion comes, the darkness, the shame, etc., you open yourself to it and you love it. Loving meaning you let it be there. It gets to be here. This darkness gets to be here. This shame gets to be here. It's a part of the experience. And the moment you no longer other it, the moment you let yourself hold space for it, see it, name it, it loses its power over you. And then you can build a compassionate relationship with all the hurt parts of yourself. And then you're moving through the world as a whole human being, not just the human being that has to smile all the time and be successful all the time, and not just the human being who believes I will only be deserving of love and belonging if I have all the money and I have all the success and I have the house and I have the right woman and I have the... You no longer have to be that person, because now you know I can be accepted exactly as I am, with my darkness, with my shadows, with my depression, with my anxiety, with my fear about the future, with my fear of death, with my fear of money. And that me, that whole me, can also be loved and accepted. But I first have to learn how to love and accept all of that inside of me by embracing it, embracing this darkness as a part of myself. And my upset, my judgment of the world that I work in, the world of self-help, is there's a constant subliminal message that if you change, insert the blank, if you change this about yourself, if you change your body, if you change your money, if you change your whatever, if you change this about yourself, the subliminal message is then you'll be accepted, then you'll be loved. And we are preyed upon by marketing messages 3,000 times a day. And
I
all
say that
those
all
messages,
the time.
Mm-hmm.
I say it's all the time. It's the biggest crime in this country. There's no significant, there's regulation everywhere. There's regulation on pharmaceuticals, financials. There's so much regulation, but there really is no regulation on marketing dollars. We can market anybody, anywhere, anytime. There is nobody holding these people accountable, and they are manipulated. I remember taking a marketing course in college, and they were able to study where people's eyeballs were watching an ad.
Yep.
And what they were actually honing in on. It's like, it's unbelievable, like how the technology that they're able to do that's really just manipulating us, and AI is just going to exacerbate it and make it even worse, that we're going to be glued in social media and all this stuff. So one takeaway, just an easy takeaway that I take to your listeners, that because I've said this so many times, is do one little hack on your iPhone. And my dad hates it because he likes his iPhone. Change your iPhone. If you're going to do this, you got to do it for 24 hours. Change your iPhone to grayscale for 24 hours.
24 seconds.
My dad lasted 24 seconds. His stories take 24 hours. But change your iPhone to grayscale and see what that does for you. See how interesting Instagram becomes at that point. See how interesting Facebook and all Twitch and Pinterest and all these other things do it.
Do you want to see what happens to my phone when I don't know if your viewers are going to be able to see this. What happens to my phone when I click the power button 3 times?
Ready? It becomes grayscale.
No. It becomes red. So it loses all blue light, which is a very stimulating light for our brain.
Correct.
So that's exactly what I do when I'm noticing, like, so firstly, early in the morning, late at night, if I have to use my phone, the screen is on red, so there's no blue light waking me up like the sun. And then, yeah, when I notice, I'm like, I'm scrolling. Thank God I don't really do it that much anymore. But historically, I would just put it, and I would put it, click 3 times, and then it was not interesting anymore.
Yeah, it's an amazing trick. I do the grayscale. I keep it on like that full time. So I've been doing it for over 2 years. It's been great. So let's pivot this into what you're doing right now with the Nova exhibit, because I mean, this is exactly what happened in Israel, and the trauma that an entire race of humanity has gone through is obviously right in your wheelhouse. And you've worked with some of the biggest people in the world, like Mezzo Soprano is a very serious actress, and my dad knows her and was very excited when you said her name. So
I
what
actually remember there was some talk of that she was going through some issues. There was some they were talking about it. Not that I really follow it, but I remember there was something about it.
big
Yeah,
like
her
people
story's
behind the
been a
scenes.
lot in the world. She has multiple sclerosis, and she came out with her multiple sclerosis just over 15 years ago. When we started coaching was when she was kind of preparing to come out about it. And she's been on quite a journey. She now has a podcast that's really beautiful, called, oh my God, Jamie Lynn. It's with Christina Applegate. It's called Messy.
Oh,
Christina Applegate also has MS.
but she
They have a
has it
podcast.
for her. She has it very badly. I don't
Correct.
know about Jamie Lynn Sigler, but I know that Christina Applegate is suffering very badly now.
Correct. You can go listen
We had
to
a
their
whole
show.
scare.
They'll have a whole.
We'll listen to your show also. I know you're coming up, but what talk to us about what's going on with the work you're doing at the Nova exhibit and
Mhm.
what you're doing for the Jewish people across the world.
So, for the last, I think, 7 years, except for during the pandemic, so 10 years ago, I, on my 30th birthday, wasn't going to do anything. And my friend Chaya Bindel, who I wouldn't be surprised if you know her, was like, I work for the Jewish Federation. Let's throw a Shabbat dinner for your 30th birthday. That evening, I had 85 people there. We did ritual, live music, poetry. We lit a fire. We had amazing food. And we were all like, whoa, this is incredible. And this inner rabbi that I didn't know existed came out of me 10 years ago. And we started something called Tribe, TRYBE, where we were hosting 200 to 300 person Shabbat dinners in LA and New York mostly. We also have done them all over the world. That stopped during the pandemic. We're just bringing it back for what we are having our Lunar New Year, which is the Rosh Hashanah dinner and ceremony and ritual. Anyways, because of doing those dinners, my childhood rabbi, Rabbi Laura Geller, had heard that I was doing this thing. And she asked me to join her then husband, her husband. Well, I won't tell you that yet. He, my whole life, would host what was called the contemplative high holiday services in the chapel next to the big synagogue at Temple Emmanuel in Beverly Hills, which is where my sister, one of my triplet sisters, is now the cantor, which is just full circle. So Rabbi Geller reached out to me. Will you join him? I hear what you're doing. Join my husband in hosting this and creating it. His name was Dr. Richard Siegel. He was an incredible Jewish educator. He taught at HUC. He was one of those quiet geniuses that just gave and gave and gave of himself. And I found myself getting mentored by him, creating these contemplative experiences with him and learning so much and getting to be supported by this brilliant man who saw my genius and pulled it out of me and made me feel so warm and welcome. And so I did that with him for 2 years. And on the third year that we were going to be doing it together, he passed away. And I took over. And when I tell you I felt his spirit with me, and that year, 600 people showed up for that Yom Kippur experience. And something happened in that room where, well, it was a remarkable experience. And I became aware this is when I'm in my clearest channel, is during these Jewish high holidays. And I'm creating this experience with cello and singer and sound bowls and gong. And I take people through meditation and contemplation. And I tell stories. And I take the themes of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, but I make them personal to your experience. So we're talking about renewal and remembering who you are and what forgiveness really is. And I'm taking you through meditations, and you're going through real transformation process in the room during high holidays. Like what I always dreamed I would have had as a child, now I'm creating it. I didn't know that that's what I wanted. And I also didn't know that this happens, and this is also Jewish. But because of the synagogue life that I grew up in that was kind of stale, and it's the choir and the rabbi's giving a sermon, and it's kind of boring, and we're saying the liturgy, and no one really knows what they're saying. and then the rabbi's preaching about Lashon Hara, and then I walk out to
And
the
it's kind of
bathroom and I
boring.
hear a woman,
It's kind of boring.
and it's boring. And I walk to the bathroom and I hear one of my friend's mother talking shit about somebody, and I'm like, the rabbi's in there talking about Lashon Hara. Like, why aren't we taking this stuff personally? And so I find myself creating this contemplative Rosh Hashanah experience. This year, I was looking for a venue because the building doesn't exist at Temple Emmanuel where I've hosted it before. Couldn't find a venue. I'm like, come on, God. Like, you want me to do this, I think. It's on my heart. I'm not choosing to do this. Show me a freaking venue. Like, show it to me. I can't find a venue. And then I go with friends to the Nova exhibit opening here in LA, opening night. And you walk through this unbelievable experience. For those of you who haven't seen it or experienced it, it is so important because you walk through the experience of being at Nova Festival on October 7th. And you have I don't want to say too much. You have the experience of being there. I'll tell you that. We all know what happened there. 350 people were murdered, people from all over the world. Largest massacre at a music festival in the history of mankind. Right? The day on October 7th when the most number of Jews were murdered since the Holocaust. A tragic event for our people and for the world and for democracy. And here you are at the Nova exhibit where they are supporting the Nova tribe, which the founders of Nova, the Nova Festival, started on October 8th when they realized that the government had to go into war mode. And they were like, who's going to take care of all the people who are suffering from this attack yesterday? And so they started building Nova camps and they started fundraising and popping up these Nova camps for yoga and wellness and therapy and trauma-informed work and dance and gardening. And they are trying to support survivors, family members of hostages, people who were affected by this horrific, there are no words, attack on Israel on October 7th. And so here I am in this room. I've walked through the whole experience. I mean, you can only imagine the tears, but it's so beautiful and it's not political. It's really about a music festival. There's no, well, I don't want to say too much.
There's nothing else to talk about.
You walk out of the space into this massive room, and I'll leave it for surprise. It's a beautiful room. And I'm standing in this room, and Scooter Braun, who brought the Nova Festival, the Nova exhibit from Tel Aviv to New York and then to LA, he's speaking on stage, telling the most beautiful story. He's so incredibly important right now for Israel. And he was speaking, and I said out loud, I need to host my contemplative here. And I happened to be standing between two women who could make that happen that I know. And so from there, I'm planning my contemplative Rosh Hashanah experience on October 4th. The doors open at 11 a.m. for the exhibit. At 12:30, we'll sit for a 2-hour ceremony of music and meditation and contemplation. I have an unbelievable singer named Hila Ben David, I'm flying in from Israel, who when she sings, God falls out of her mouth. And she is a healer with her voice. She is, I'm pinching myself. Like, for the last month, I'm just receiving phone calls from those incredible artists, the most incredible musicians, funders, people who want to support this initiative. And so I'm hosting this transformative experience. The doors open at 11 for the exhibit. 12:30 is the experience. 2:30 we'll have wine and passed food from this amazing Israeli restaurant called Carmel that has a pop-up at Nova, which is delicious. If you're in LA, you have to go. It's such a vibe. You literally feel like you're in Tel Aviv. It's like the only restaurant in LA where there's a vibe and the energy is high and it's fun and people are taking shots, and it's just like the best parts of Israeli culture in LA. So Carmel will be doing food and we'll hang out. We'll get 2 hours together after the experience to connect with each other, to connect with community, to hold each other, to be with each other. I don't have to tell you, this is the first high holiday since October 7th. And so it feels really, really important that we come together. And when I say we, I have a lot of people who are Jewish that come to my experiences, who are seeking a different kind of experience of their Judaism. And I always thought of myself as a boo Jew, but now I think of myself as a Jew because I realize that all the Jew is in the boo and before the boo, and it's all right there. The wisdom, the magic, the miracles, the consciousness, the transformation, it's all in our scripture. It's all in our traditions. It's all in our teachings. And so people who are looking for that, come, please. It's a fundraiser for Nova, for the Nova tribe. I'm hoping to send as much money as possible. It's quite an expensive experience to put on, with flying people in and musicians and artists and all the things that it takes. And I believe in even when you're doing a nonprofit or supporting a nonprofit, I believe always in paying artists well. So it's an expensive thing that I'm doing. It's a big risk that I'm taking on, and I believe it's all going to work out. We have tickets available, and I believe that they will sell out. And I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful to Hashem, to God, to the universe, to all the people in my life, that I get the privilege and the honor of doing this.
Ryan,
Yeah.
how can people connect with you? How can people get in touch with you?
Perfect.
How can people follow you, see your work, see the amazing journey that you're taking people through?
Thank you for asking. There's two places to find me. One is mostly on Instagram. I put videos up all the time. You can see my life with my dog and what I'm thinking about and what I'm teaching on. And that's on Instagram at Waking Up with Ryan, at Waking Up with Ryan. And then my website is a bit of a mouthful. It's called sanctuarywithryanweiss.com. The reason I'm sharing the website with you, that this is all changing. I'm in a process of a rebrand. The reason I'm sharing with you my website is that I send out, when I feel the strike of inspiration, I send out these Waking Up with Ryan emails, which is just a way for me to drop some love, some wisdom, some stories into your inbox, so that while you're scrolling through the incessant number of emails that we get that are constantly stressing us out, there's a little dose of love there for you to help you remember who you are. And so that's on my website. If you scroll down, you can opt into my email list and start getting emails from me.
Right. Ryan, we normally do ask a defining moment question, but I feel like you gave a lot of those defining moments, time with your mom, going through these different moments in your life, because you were able to really bring experiences. And I think a lot of people are able to connect with you because of that. And I hope people understand the openness of this conversation. It was probably the most open, Dad, do you agree, that we've had in a conversation on this podcast? These are stories that I've never even heard about my dad, and these are stories that obviously I don't really know you well, but now I feel like I know you a lot better. And it's the key of exfoliating yourself, and the key of opening yourself. It could be financially, physically, emotionally, whatever it is, and that's really how to achieve true success in yourself, and then be able to give it to others. So Ryan, we really appreciate your openness. We really appreciate the free coaching. We are Jewish, and we were excited to that we were able to go through that. My dad doesn't seem upset.
I don't want to see a bill, or I don't want to get a bill or anything like that.
I could say a quick joke. I could say a quick joke if everybody wants to hear it, but it's a solid joke. So
I have a joke too, but go ahead.
There's a lawyer sitting next to a doctor on Sabbath at synagogue. I know we typically try to keep these to 40 minutes, but it's okay. So there's a doctor sitting next to a lawyer at synagogue, and everyone keeps coming up to the doctor the whole time. Doc, I have this, I have that, I have this, I have that, and constantly the whole time he can't get away from people. So he goes to the lawyer. He goes like, "How come you're a lawyer? People definitely have legal questions. Or going through this, going through that. Can you tell me, like, how come nobody's bothering you?" He goes, "Well, Doc, because at the end of Sabbath, what I do is I start sending people bills for my time at the synagogue." So he goes, "Oh, that's such a great idea." The Sabbath ends, and he gets home. All of a sudden, he gets a bill from the lawyer.
That's amazing. If I could bill for all the coaching that I've done that's gone unpaid, my God, I'd be in a PJ right now. I want to share I want to share two things, and before we close out here. Firstly, well, three things. Thank you. Thank you to Steve for connecting us. Thank you, Yair, for jumping into this conversation with me and for giving me an opportunity to chat with you. It's very meaningful, the work that you're doing in the world. When Steve told me your story about shifting to resilient voices and what you're doing for Israel and the conversations that you're having, I'm incredibly grateful. I know we barely touched on Israel here, but I'm incredibly grateful for everyone who is doing the hard, dedicated work right now to help dispel the insanity and the lies and the misinformation and the miseducation that is seeped its way into the consciousness of our country into the hearts of very, very, very well-meaning people who care about social justice and equality and women's rights and LGBT rights. And it makes sense that these people, like I'm one of them, who cares about those things, as you are, I'm sure, we become quite vulnerable to the story of oppressor and oppressed. And we are seeing in the world that very, very well-meaning people are projecting a narrative that is not accurate. And it's incredibly dysfunctional, and it's incredibly scary, and it's incredibly painful, because these people do not realize that they are advocating for the continuous death of Gaza. And they're not pointing to the real issue, the real problem at the root of why this war is happening, which is the desired destruction of democracy in the world. And Israel just happens to be the tip of the spear that is fighting the fight for us, which is also why I feel through Nova, we need to be helping the mental health of people everywhere and our people in Israel. And I pray that one day that Hamas is taken out so that we can do the same thing for the people of Gaza. Because as long as Hamas is in power, we cannot rebuild. We cannot take care of these people who are suffering at the hands of this war. And so all of that to say, you doing this work, you having the voices that you have coming on and educating people is so important. And David, what I want to say to you is thank you for your vulnerability. I have these kinds of conversations all the time. To be sitting here with you and your son, I feel like we had a family therapy session, and that is so gorgeous. And I hope that this helps the two of you to even connect more about things that you guys haven't talked about and unpack with each other. And it's such a privilege. The last thing I want to share is that for people in LA and in New York, obviously, please come to my contemplative. I'll figure out the link is on my Instagram, or you can message me or whatever. That's October 4th. But also on October 3rd in the evening, I'm hosting Tribe Rosh Hashanah dinner here in a beautiful home in Beverly Hills. And we're also hosting a break fast on Yom Kippur in New York City. That's ceremony and dinner and all. So if that calls to anyone, if you want to be there with us, just maybe send me a DM or send me an email or whatever, and I'll do my best to get you the information.
Great. Ryan, thank you so much for what you're doing. Thank you for so much for the beautiful words. And everybody, thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next one.
Goodbye.